Hello everybody, and here we go again. Welcome back again for another tumultuous tier list trek. We are back for the next part. We started on the D tier last time after wrapping up the E tier, and today we will close off the D tier with the rest of those players. I believe we got 7 D tier players done last time. And again, it's good that I have these couple of day breaks in between because it allows me to just finalize everything in my mind and go from there. And in the couple of days since the last video, I have moved 1 or 2 people from the D tier, either higher up the D tier, or I believe 2 of them went up to C tier after I fought it through a bit more. Either way, after I name these players, I probably will change my mind on some of them in some way. I mean, even in the last part, I was probably a bit harsh on Scorpion rules, but that's what I'm here to do. Just say my opinion, think it through. Again, there's like 200 players in this tier list overall. I'm not going to be set in stone on all of them. But for the most part, I'm happy, and we continue our trek towards that eventual S+ tier today. So D tier, we ended last time with Swing Point. We start this time with Eternal Erico, who was a Mastermind main. I believe they played Nikolai and Alex mainly. And they were okay. They definitely had the potential in areas to make things tricky. You had to sweat. You couldn't just blindly charge through them and win. Then Nikolai was perfectly okay. With more practice and dedication, I think they could have been solid. Eternal Erico's main problem was rage quitting. Again, he could be very competitive in a match, and then he'd do something major to turn the tide of the game, whether that be his bioweapon getting downed or something similar. But once that happened, I've seen him rage quit at the start of Area 2 multiple times just because his Yurik was in a bad spawn location. This guy got rattled by the easiest of things, and even if you're a talented mastermind, you have to be cool under pressure to be maximizing your potential. But if you're not especially talented, as I say, Eternal Erico is okay, but not amazing. And if you're not amazing, and you also are mentally not brilliant in the heat of the moment, then you're in trouble. Anyway, next up we have 1390. The person who pretended to be a Japanese girl at one stage. It's ridiculous how many identity changes that 1390 seem to go through, but anyway, I'm here to talk about them as a player. They main Jill. They were alright. You felt like they didn't really fully carry their weight against creatures. You felt like there was many times I was Samuel or we had a Tyrone on our team, and it did feel like 13 wasn't quite killing enough to justify him being Jill, but he was okay. Again, we are, nearly 10 players into the D tier list. These aren't bad players anymore. As I said in the last part, these are average to above average players, and certainly good players by the top of D tier. Not players that I would put in a SWAT team, but in a general resistance sense, they're okay. 1390 is probably the perfect embodiment of okay. Yeah, he's just okay. I want to try and expand my answer, but there's not much to say here. As I say, he's not a great one against creatures, but he's fine. But anyway, I won't stay around any longer because we have got a lot in D tier. Rapidly moving on, we have Niu Piu. She streamed the game. for a little while. She was very active in the game for a good 2 years. Like, a lot of the big players did know who she was, would bump into her, would comment on her streams. Like, yeah, and she, as I said in the fake tier list, she had fun at the game. She was a good vibe while playing the game. As a player, not the most talented, but she was okay. Like, her Tyrone was genuinely good at taking out creatures. Her problem, as I said in the fake tier list video, was that she dies quite often, and she was Val and Tyrone, so, you know, you want those characters to be sturdy and to keep going. She was a bit of a Hail Mary, as in she'd do all or nothing. She'd have to kill an entire room, or she'd go down trying. But no, I mean, it was always fun playing with her. And yeah, overall, I'd say D tier is about right. Next up, we have Ricard Rex. Now, this guy was a Martin main. I don't think he played anyone else as well. But yeah, he was, again, one of these players who, if I bumped into them when I was in duo or trio, I'd be like, yeah, that's fine. Like, he was a okay Martin. He didn't always do the most optimal things with his weapon choices, or, you know, positionally he was just quite average. But, yeah, he was fine with his flash. He used it at decent times. Again, I haven't played with him particularly much, but when I did play with him, he was just fine. Like, nothing too majorly wrong. I mean, some players in this list, the funny thing is, like, even up to the C tier, you're going to be seeing players who have good talent, but then have really big weaknesses that stop them being B tier upwards. So, yeah. In Ricard X Rex's case, he's just not particularly talented, but he also doesn't make many mistakes. So it evens out to, you know, like a 6 out of 10. And that's solid. Because the top of the D tier is like 6.5-ish. 6.25, 6.5-ish out of 10. Bottom of the D tier is like 5.5 out of 10. So, yeah. Next up is V Knight V. Now, I've heard a lot about this guy. I've been in matches with him here and there. I'll be honest, that most of them happened a good period of time ago, that they're hard to recall. Faced him with my Nicola a couple of times, and he was alright. He focused on certain cameras far too much, which then exposed him to other cameras that he wasn't really trying to be aware of. And, you know, it doesn't factor into him as a player, but I've seen plenty of rage messages from him too. Certainly a big attitude, not necessarily one that synced up with how good he actually was at the game, but he was all right. Next up is Old Pongalong. Very committed Daniel main mostly. I think he dabbles in a net quite a bit as well, but yeah, Daniel seemed to be his main shtick. And yeah, I had fun matches with Old Pongalong quite often. I wouldn't say it was particularly amazing, but like, if I was in a full team, Old Pongalong was very comfortable to beat. Like, you'd have to always be active, but you could just kind of go through the motions. But Old Pongalong was like the perfect mastermind for me to face when I wanted a good match, but I was in like duo queue. Like, if I faced him in a team, it's fine, but it's also a little bit too easy. But in duo queue or something like that, it's always hard to find the right balance between too easy and, you know, too hard that the randoms will then screw you over. So Old Pongalong was like that good middle ground, good balance. I rate him for being, you know, committed to Daniel for the most part. So yeah, good stuff, Old Pongalong. You're someone who's good to see around playing. Like, you have to have masterminds like you around just to keep the player base stable and healthy. And yeah, To a lot of people, Old Pongalong will be a hell of a challenge, and I'm sure he has quite a lot of entertaining matches with the builds he uses, to be honest. And similarly, next up is Healing Herb. Now, Healing Herb is more talented than Old Pongalong. I'd say he's a better Mastermind and Survivor. I haven't seen Old Pongalong as Survivor, but you know what I mean. Healing Herb has the potential to be a decent Survivor, which would push him higher in the tier list overall. But anyway, yeah, Healing Herb, as I've said in the Honest Q&As, this guy is lovely. He's a fantastic guy. I never had an annoying match with him. I remember getting wiped in Area 2 against him when I was duo queue with my sister and 2 babies, but, like, who cares? It's to Healing Herb. I don't care if I lose to him, because I'm not being funny. Most of the time, if he sees even one baby on your team, he'll just say, oh, that's fine, I don't want to win anyway, you have a free win type thing. And it isn't like someone who's coming up either, where they seemingly just give up for the sake of it. Like, Healing Herb, he's just fair. If something has gone against the survivors that is a bit much, then he just says, fine, I'll balance out the odds. And yeah, I think if Healing Herb genuinely, like, full-on sweat a lot, he could be really solid. There were 1 or 2 matches I had against, like, his, what was it? What's it called? Unnatural Selection Daniel. And I believe once against his Annette. And 2 times they were very good matches. Like, we did win with, like, 3 or 4 minutes, but he was really competitive, really good. So it feels a bit harsh to penalise him for being wholesome. But at the same time, it's a tier list of rating people on how good they were at the game throughout the game's lifespan. And, you know, it's not... Let's say the next 50 players, I rate Healing Herb higher than them in terms of what he's brought to the community. No disrespect if you're in the next 50 players, by the way. But my point is that Healing Herb being and playing how he does is much more important than being a few spaces higher in a tier list, you know? He's actually had an effect on the community, whereas I'm just going to be yapping my mouth off for a few more videos to milk views, and then this will be done. So, yeah. Anyway, next up, we have a man who, thankfully, I didn't see at the last one I was at. It's I Film Weddings. That makes me sound like I'm being horrible to him, but I just didn't want to see him at my wedding. I was like, nevertheless, I'm digressing like crazy. I Film Weddings, he's an interesting character. He has a lot of builds up his sleeve. Some okay, some pretty bad. I remember him having a weird Annette build with a gun in it, and it was very weird. It was like 1 gun, and it's like, right, anything else? And it was just like random stuff thrown in. It was very weird. His Nikolai is actually a little bit underrated, but the thing with I Film Weddings is he rage quits, but also he just uses so many builds that it's really hard for him to be consistent. Like, I think if he mained Nikolai or mained a solid Annette build, because I've seen him be decent with Annette, then I think he could be in the C tier, but ultimately there's just so many builds that he experiments with, which is fine, but then he rage quits using those builds as well. So it's like, the longer you use those builds, the more I'm going to think, oh, I Film Weddings isn't really that good. But overall, he balances out to perfectly okay. My phone has scrolled up for some reason, but anyway, next up, one of the people who I'm friends with, J Money. J Money, what has his other names been? I can't remember. Oh, Blackhawk, that's the one. Much better name than J Money. Yeah, he was called Blackhawk MM before. Tyrone main for the most part. He's like a few Tyrones who are in and around this area. similar to Adolfo, actually, who I believe I mentioned in the last part, yeah, like the first few D-tier players, where they can do bits and pieces with Tyrone, but at the same time, they kind of take his extra health and durability to an extreme, and they kind of get themselves in trouble by trying to, take on too much responsibility. And don't get me wrong, I'd rather have a brave but rather interesting Tyrone than a Tyrone who just stands back, never opens doors, never gets stuck in. But yeah, J Money, interesting player. He's had some decent matches with Jill, also some really bad matches with her. His Tyrone is okay. His Valerie is alright. And there's not really much to write home about apart from that. He's an okay mastermind, but again, half the time he doesn't try if he's against even a decent duo or trio queue. So it probably averages out to, yeah, as I say, around about here in the D tier. Next up, feels like we're getting a lot of masterminds lately. Next up is Anita Poo. A net main, it was mostly ambush, I believe. And, yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm sure back in the day they would have been more effective. They probably had a decent win rate. But there isn't many good ambush players around anymore. And I can't put Anita Poo as a good ambush player in the modern day either. Yeah, again, Anita Poo's like the perfect example of if you have a bad random on your team, they're going to take advantage. If you don't, then you're going to win very easily. So yeah, Anita Poo, not too much to say. Just an okay run-of-the-mill mastermind. Next up, we have someone who I actually quite like a lot. I'm making it sound like all the D-tier players I hate. No, there's a lot of nice people in D-tier. Look at how I talked about Healing Herb. But anyway, no, this is a guy who I've talked to on stream a few times, and we've had good matches. And actually, I believe when he goes full meta, he is a good mastermind. I'm sure some of you are probably thinking of someone different right now, but here it's J-Sam. J-Sam, he's talented in some areas, but he's wildly inconsistent. Like, I've had matches against his Nikolai where he plays quite well, where he doesn't give up much time at all. He's doing well, he's doing decently, he's competitive. And then other times I'm beating his Nikolai with 7 minutes, and it's not like I've been in miles stronger teams. It's just, yeah, J-Sam is one of the most inconsistent players around. And in a way, that's a good thing, because it's better than just being flat out not good enough to improve. But, yeah, I don't know. Again, he wildly goes from a 7 out of 10 performance to a 3 out of 10, and it changes match by match, to be honest. But, again, whenever I've faced him, we've had good words on the stream afterwards. He's a nice guy. I like him. And, yeah, about midway through D tier. Next up, the man who wants me to join him permanently in Crash Team Rumble. It is Zombie Ache. Now, Zombie Ache is, again, like, perfect for this part of the tier list. He's just solid without being spectacular. I don't think he's talented enough in any area to say, yeah, this guy, if he irons out his mistakes, goes up to C tier. No, he's like a better version of Rickard Rex, where he's just okay. His Nikolai is very inconsistent. Sometimes it's alright. Sometimes it gets absolutely stomped. As a survivor, his Valerie is, yeah, above average. His Valerie's above average. And yeah, not much more to add to Zombie Ache. Again, we've got many players left in the D tier here, by the way. But yeah, he is next up. Following him is the Carl Ouch. Interesting player, this. I feel like I've changed my mind on Carl quite a lot over time. When I first played with him, I thought he was good. Then I had a few poor sessions with him where I was like, And And then I played with him again, and he was Jan, and he did quite well. And then he played like Tyrone in another session, and Val, and I was like, And then he went back to Jan, and I was like, Like, I wouldn't even say Carl's inconsistent as such, but yeah, I think he just struggles against some builds. And there's one or two he shines more against. And they're very, like, niche builds, too. Like, he's really solid against ambush, but then, you know, chuck him against Infection Mod and he seems to really struggle. So, it's, yeah, Carl's an interesting player. I think this is a fair place for him. I think his best character is Jan, and if he improved where he'd need to be a better Jan, I think he could be in the C tier. But for now, evens out to D. Next up is somebody who I've seen a lot of people face. I've seen a lot of matches of his. And yeah, I think I've faced him twice, ever. I beat him in solo queue, I think it was. I can't remember the match exactly, and that's not disrespecting him. I'm just trying to recall the match. It's Bindi Alamak. The man who Mike is furious with 24/7. Bindi Alamak seems perfectly serviceable as a mastermind. He reminds me of like that swing point type of player who could have got a lot of views on YouTube back in the day by showing off builds where he's beating like duo queues or a couple of high ranks who aren't actually that good. And I'm not saying Bindi's like not a decent mastermind, but again, like, it's just with him, I always remain unconvinced. Like, there has been matches that he's won and posted as well where it's very clear that there's area 3 lag involved. But no, I mean, again, I'll give him credit though. I enjoy the fact that he posts so many Resistance YouTube videos. It's like, why not? A lot of people get very salty about being uploaded against, and don't get me wrong, I always say, oh, that's going on YouTube if I lose, but at the end of the day, like, I don't really care. Like, people want to show off their wins, people want to make content, and any interesting wins being online is fine, why not? So, yeah, not much more to add about him as a player though, so we move on. Now, earlier I was saying about how Healing Herb, you know, he gets the balance right. He doesn't give up as such. If he gives you a free win, it feels right. Now, this guy I'm mentioning now was one of the really awkward ones to rank, because I think when he tries, and he has tried more lately, but it's a bit too little too late overall to push him into C tier. But when Barry Burtons tries, he is good. He's not amazing, but he's good. His Daniel, it's good. His Annette, it's good. But again, even though he's tried more recently, it still feels like there's a 60% chance of him not trying. And back in the day, it was genuinely 95% chance. It's a shame. If he tried every match, I think Barry would be comfortably C tier, but as we stand right now, just midway through D instead. Next up, we have the person who I believe to be the best of the OG streamers, who were most notable to at least a UK audience. So we've had Swing Point, we've had Tide Time, and we have, well, this guy was indeed British, the other two weren't, but to a British audience, those were the main three. It's Sinnoh Beats. Now, Sinnoh Beats was just by all means a solid player, solid mastermind, and he played fun builds, and he was a good guy. I remember he came from PC to PS4, and me, Sam, I can't remember who the other two were, but whoever we were with, I think Andy might have been on the team. I can't remember exactly. But anyway, we gave him his first loss on PS5, and, he wasn't salty. He'd played for about 2 days, unbeaten on PS5. Well, it was PS4 at that time, but yeah. And yeah, every time I interacted with him, he was a thoroughly nice guy. I've still got a clip of in like mid-2020 where I used Martin against his Daniel, and we lost, but it was an amazing match. I've still got the whole match. It's a really good one. But on his stream, he just was like, "M. Weston, you were the Martin? You were amazing! Oh my god, that was so good." That was a really bad impression of him. But point is, he was a really nice guy, really solid mastermind. Teamed up with him a couple of times as Survivor, like bumped into him, and he was a good Survivor. Yeah, I wouldn't say he has enough to go to the C tier, because he did stop playing before or around the last updates. So, it's hard, unless he was the best mastermind and then stopped playing around the last updates, it's hard for me to push him much higher than this. But by all means, back in the day, good, solid player. Next up is Talented Dick. He spelt Dick wrong. It's D-C-I-K in his username, I believe. Anyway, interesting player, this guy. Voice line spammer, rage quits. He's okay with Trap Alex sometimes and bad other times. I think that sums him up in general. He's okay to good sometimes and pretty shambolic in other times. Yeah, I think because he's okay with Trap Alex, that there's enough potential for him to have been a bit better. And don't get me wrong, some games he was a bit of a nightmare to deal with, but yeah, overall, too inconsistent, bad attitude, so not enough to go higher. Next up is... This is a hard one for me to judge. It's Magic Cool. Nikolai Main. Now, a bit like Vakal Ouch, I kind of flip-flop on my thoughts on Magical. Sometimes I think he's pretty good. Other times I'm like, there's not much happening here. So it evens out to just above midway through the B tier. There's potential there. And I think if I saw him play more, maybe he'd be higher. I'm just being cautious with this ranking of him. I do like how he plays the game. Didn't see enough of him as Survivor either. I think he was okay as Survivor, actually. But yeah, evens out for now. Up next, another person who was a great personality in the Mastermind side of things. It's Ted Octa, or Teddy R. Played Alex a hell of a lot. Always used these funky, cool builds. Had some really impressive results here and there. Like, on his streams, he'd just ask people what to play. They'd suggest things to him, and he could get curb stomped. And he wouldn't care. And by all means, he was lovely to me every single time I spoke to him. Feels harsh to put him here, because I know he had some good results, and with Yataveo, he was brilliant with Yataveo. But, yeah, he got stomped a hell of a lot as well. When he went a bit more meta, he was good. If he was meta more often, and again, I don't want to just rank it on... I'm not ranking it on if you play meta, you're high on this list. No. But I'm saying that if he played meta, he would have been more competitive and would have proved himself to be a proper, seriously solid mastermind. But, yeah, it's a shame. Overall, with the results that stare you in the face, I'd say it's a D. Following him is Celian, the Jill main, the man who's ranking up Jill on his Smurf as well. His Jill it's solid. Always liked facing it. Always liked having it on my team, just as like, a bit of fun. believe he used melee quite a bit on his Jill, and he was a rocket main. Yeah, fun player to play with. Would I say he was amazing? Not particularly, but he knew what to do most of the time, and you could, carry him along without him single-handedly screwing things up like other players. He'd be higher, he'd be in the C tier if his masterminds weren't god-awful. And don't get me wrong, there's some people who just don't touch Mastermind, who have maybe got away a bit generously in these tier lists, but Salian's Masterminds are so bad, and he's played so much of Mastermind that I have to deduct him marks for that. Like, he's a high-ranked Nikolai, and net, his Daniel's like 130 plus. None of them are good at all. They're really poor. He gives away 10s on his cams all the time. I'm sorry, Salian, but it's how the cookie crumbles. Next up is the unspeakably Jan main. Very high-ranked Jan main. But a bit like Symphonic Phantom, she wasn't particularly good. With Symphonic Phantom, though, it was more him being stubborn. I think he was a good enough player to have improved if he took advice on board, but the Unspeakably, she just wasn't particularly great, and it feels harsh, but yeah. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying she's bad, because she's, she's midway D tier. But for her rank as a Jan, the first few times I played with her and she was like rank 500, 600, whatever it was, and then we got rolled by Nikolai's, and I was just like, yeah, a bit underwhelmed. She's good enough in other areas where she can level out to a mid-D, but yeah, just yeah, for her rank, I did expect more against Nikolai's, that's all. Up next is Chevy Beatford. Interesting one, this. As a survivor, I can't remember who he mained, but I remember him being perfectly okay. I think it might have been Tyrone, yeah? Yeah. But yeah, he was solid. And as Mastermind, he's fun to play against. He's had one or two decent results here and there. He's got curb stomped a lot of times, but there's not much to say for him, and it evens out to a D. Up next, a sound guy, nice guy to play with, Unknown J Plays. Really nice dude, thoroughly solid player with multiple survivors. I think he played Val, Tyrone. Was it Jill as well? Maybe I'm misremembering that part. But he was a solid Val, solid Tyrone, nice guy. Not particularly incredible either, but yeah, he wouldn't exactly let you down single-handedly. He was just another one of like these Ricard Rex, and who was the other guy I mentioned as just perfectly serviceable? Was it Zombie Ache? Yeah. Just, ones who aren't particularly talented, but they have enough knowledge about the game to just keep ticking along. Next up is Hunk. Is it Hunk X57 or something? I don't know. Hunk is okay. His builds definitely would overpower a lot of solo queue or duo queue teams. But he's blocked so many big-name players by now, it's a joke. He gets ridiculously salty about anyone putting sprays down when he does it all the time. And as a player, yeah, he just relies on very certain snowballs. So he can definitely overwhelm you in certain cases, but yeah, otherwise he's just a D-tier mastermind. And don't get me wrong, we're near the upper tier of D now. So I believe he's more talented than ones before, but yeah, nothing special. And the same goes for Sun God. Again, relies on very specific overwhelming spam builds and stuff like that. He deliberately tries to make the game lag, always denies it. He's an okay in it, but he'll lose to any decent team with even just Sam in it, but if it's Sam and Tyrone, then you'll beat him with 10 minutes. Next up is... this was interesting. I didn't want to not put him in the list at all, but I haven't seen enough of him to make a full judgment either. So it's half intuition, half foggy memory. It's Xbox Clown. Back in the day, I remember him being really quite bad, to be honest, but he seems to have improved a good amount. Seems competitive. He seems that kind of like Bindi Alamak type who can beat some Xbox guys. Again, I think, to be fair, I'd probably put Xbox Clown lower than this, because now I think about it, he does play on Xbox. I don't know how I let that slip my mind, but it is going to be a less competitive environment. Yeah, Bindi Alamak's better than him, so I'd put Xbox Clown down below. Oof. Yeah, down below Healing Herb and Old Pongalong. One above V Knight V. Next up is Revalio. Haven't bumped into this guy particularly much, but then I have like 1 or 2 days in a row where I see him quite a lot. Plays, is it Jan and Val? I'm not too sure, but he's pretty decent. Yeah, he has a good knowledge of the game. He's alright as Mastermind. His aim isn't amazing, but as I say, his knowledge is solid. And yeah, just a solid player. Next up, might seem harsh on paper, but I think I'm happy with it. It's Pain Akatsuki, or Pain Akatsuki, if that's unclear to some people. I don't rate his Becca that highly. Like, he's fine. Like, compared to the people in this area of the tier list, he's fine. But, again, for that higher rank, it doesn't do too much for me. His Alex is alright, but, again, very laggy as well. I'm not using that as a reason to bump him lower, by the way. I know about region lag, but, like, I'm saying that Payne does win a lot of games with Area 3 Alex, because of lag and not because of him actually doing much. But he seems to believe he has quite a few comeback wins because he's good with Area 3 Alex, when he's just fine. And yeah, just overall, he's fine as a player, but I do expect him to be better for the amount of hours in the game, that's all. Next is Obscura. She's like a better Rodolfo Ramos, like a mainstay in the game, who is just alright. Like, I think Obscura's a decent Valerie, but at the same time, she's one of these players where I feel like she's alright, and you feel like, oh yeah, she's solid, and then when there's even a half chaotic match, she seems to completely crumble. Very salty as Mastermind, by the way. But yeah, she's a player who will get you through most of the comfortable matches without a sweat. Chaotic matches, more in question. Next up, oh my god, this video is going to go on for probably another 7 or 8 minutes yet. Next up is Solid Snake. The voice line spammer, the Infinite X and Infinite Nemi. Solid Snake is... I mean, again, people have called him trash, and I get it, because against a good team, he's a bit of a joke in areas. But I've seen him beat half-decent teams, and you have to be switched on to beat him most of the time. Like, don't get me wrong, I have had comfortable wins against him in duo queue, and even one in solo, I think, but yeah, he's an interesting one. On a good day, he's capable of being a decent challenge. On a bad day, he's very bad. If he cut out the voice lines, I think, and focused on his gameplay, it'd probably be a little bit better. But yeah, not much more to say there. Following Solid Snake is an interesting mastermind. He does play Survivor as well, and he's alright there. It's a guy who... No, it's not it's the guy. It's a guy who plays very interesting mixtures of builds. And he's alright with them. It's Rio Rustico. He had this like ridiculous trap spam and cheap zombie spam Daniel build, which was hilarious. He has played more meta at times and been fine. He mostly plays kind of for fun. He's an okay survivor. So yeah, just, you know, a nice staple in the community. Can play Survivor and Mastermind and do fine, so evens out to here. Next up is one I didn't particularly see too much of. Played with Enze, E-N-D-Z-E-J. There's different ways to pronounce that. I know some people say NJ, some say Enze, some say even Enzej. But anyway, it's Lorelaine, I believe is her name. Good rhyme. She seemed alright. I don't have much to say, to be honest. I've mostly only seen her in the background in Enze's streams. Yeah, it just seemed a perfectly serviceable Val. I think it was Val she mostly played. And I wanted to include her because she's notable enough, but yeah, it seemed to even out to D, but there's not much to say, to be honest. Next up, there is a bit to say. This guy played with Darkness OG quite a lot. I say quite a lot, a hell of a lot. And I think for a period, the fact that he was known as Darkness's friend and they played all the time kind of made people think he was better than he was. I never really rated him, to be honest, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because he is still ultimately near the top of D tier, so like a 6.25 out of 10 player, which is fine, which is good. Just, he isn't as good as Darkness, and I think a lot of people thought he was near that level. It's Blaze XAX50. Tyrone main. Very interesting player. He'd do very interesting choices at times. Pick the wrong weapons against Daniels with endurance. Sometimes get a Kashima against them, sometimes not. Sometimes a Kashima against defense and net. Sometimes just fully vibe, like... Yeah, and he also was USB, but he didn't use it very well. Like, I remember a match against Rat Labs as Terminal Spencer on Abandoned Park, and Rat was literally cycling on one terminal for 6 minutes, because Blaze just didn't push the terminal. He just literally stood in a blind spot and waited for the shield to go. It's like... Not been funny, Rat can keep a shield going for a good amount of time, even under pressure. If you're just going to let him casually cycle, like, he's not going to lose his shield, and he didn't. And it wasn't until, like, 30 seconds to go where Blaze started pushing, and it was too late. So, yeah, don't get me wrong, he had enough knowledge of the game that it puts him up to D tier at near the top, but yeah, very questionable player. He wasn't one of these solid like zombie ache players who was just not particularly amazing but was always solid. No, Blaze could have been better than he was, but he made some very questionable choices. Next up is a guy I get on with well. Fun to be around, okay as Survivor, can be decent as Mastermind and can be also average. It's Angelo, or Angelog. Yeah, honestly, there's not much to say about Angelo. He's just alright, perfectly serviceable, solid, okay as Survivor. Wouldn't say he particularly takes the slot of a Jill or Becca that well. Like, you have to be really good with them to be worth it in the team, is what I mean. And as Mastermind, there's sometimes where he's good and competitive with his gun build. Other times he's just vibing. And don't get me wrong, he's a nice kid. I like him a lot. We get on well. Yeah, near the top of D tier. Following him is ex-Sniper Wolf. Really liked playing with this guy back in the day. Seemed a thoroughly solid guy. That sounds really wrong. A thoroughly nice guy and a thoroughly solid player. Not enough to carry him up to C tier, but just he could play a few characters. He was fine with a few of them, and that's about all she wrote. Following that is Rule of Rose. Decent as Nikolai, alright as Jan. Like, we're getting to this stage of the tier list where people are decent with some characters and alright with others, and it kind of just balances out to just missing out on the C tier. Like, we're thoroughly at the 6.25 to 6.5 out of 10 players now, which is good. And Rule of Rose is good, just not good enough to push into the C tier. Following that is a very interesting, weird player, to be honest. It's a Takumanu. Really weird attitude with the game, very hypocritical. They hate every time they lose as Mastermind, but gladly voice line spam all the time. And then it's the same with Survivor. They complain when they lose, but when they win, it's because they're amazing and not because the Mastermind got screwed over. It's just a lot of baloney, to be honest. Takumanu's alright. His Tyrone's good. It's not amazing, it's good. And as Mastermind, he's just perfectly average. Following him is Daddy Versetti. Now, Daddy Versetti has been moved up this list a little bit, actually. In the past couple of weeks, he's shown he's improved a bit. Back in the day, he was an ambush main who always rage quit, and now he's a little bit better. He's spread out to Infection Alex, and he's alright with that. Well, I say alright, he's good. He spams well, places his creatures in decent areas. Yeah, I'll give him credit. He's got better. He needs to do it over a little bit longer period of time to keep going, but yeah, Daddy Versetti is improving. Following him is Mung Dory, or JM Kang as he's known on like the Facebook groups. I haven't seen enough of him. When I have faced him, I did 3-person him on Casino, his Infection Alex. He seemed alright with it. I know he's got some interesting builds, fun builds. Yeah. Again, I think he's one of these type of like Bindi Alamak type players, Xbox Clown type players. He's better than them. And I like seeing them be active presences in like Discords or on YouTube, social media. I like having them around. It's good that they post their matches because they're not always meta. They're fun. What they talk about, they suggest builds, etc. Yeah, Mung Dory is one of the better people for that type of vibe, but yeah, just top of D tier. Following him is a similar type of vibe again. It's Bishonen. Bishonen, he's got a decent knowledge of the game. Would I say he's good? I mean, for his rank, he should be better, but he's fine. Posts a few too many wins against like teams with flaws in them and claims it's a SWAT team. But yeah, he's good. He's nothing spectacular. Should be better for his rank, but he's good. And into the final 5 players of the D tier. This has gone on a treat, hasn't it? Blimey. Gen Z Power. Played with Adolfo quite a bit, I believe. Haven't seen too much of them. It's a bit like Lorelane. But Gen Z Power seemed quite decent. I would have pushed them up to C tier if I saw more of them. I believe they played Jill quite a bit, and I quite liked their Jill. but I didn't see enough of them. So it's mainly they're as high as they are off potential, but also didn't reach C tier because I'm basing off potential as well. Like, I didn't see enough of them. Next up is Amazi, or Amesy, with, the two I's and then the X at the end. Plays Daniel, rage quits a hell of a lot. He's competitive, he's aggressive. Is he particularly great? No. But he's fine. He has good knowledge of the game, but he doesn't always put it into the best use. Can win, definitely, if a team panics or snowballs. So yeah, evens out to about here. I said into the final 5. It was into the final 4, actually. No, into the final 3, actually. I accidentally kept 2 players. I pasted them twice. So finally, the final player in the D tier, bar for any random changes and drop-downs from the C tier within the next 2 seconds. Let me check the list just in case. No, I will commit with 1 or 2 of them, even though they're a little bit interesting. Even this one could have crept into C tier. It's Dutch Hom, the Molotov man. I actually thought he was a duper for a long time, but I think it got proven that he could have what he did use in the end. I think he proved himself. As a player, he's quite solid. Valmain knows what to do. Bit funky with his build and equipment, but he's unique, he's fun, and he's a solid player. And he'll round off the D tier after 52 minutes. I do apologise. I'm sure a few of you are despising the fact you've had to hear me talk for 52 minutes. I'm sure some of you love the fact. If you do, I love you too. If not, why are you still watching? Anyway, D tier is over. C tier is fucking massive, and I'm hoping to trim that down a little bit, because if I don't, it's either going to be in 2 parts, 3 parts, or a 1 hour, 30 minute single video. It'll be ridiculous. Anyway, thank you for watching. Been lovely again. Give me feedback. What would you change from this D tier? Who would you move up? Who would you move down? Give me your opinions in general. Until next time, take care, and I'll see you for the C tier.